I'm too young to be a wife." Emily Carter's voice cracked through the silence of the church like a whip. Every head turned. Every breath stopped. The preacher froze mid-sentence. The groom, a man old enough to be her grandfather, slowly turned to look at her. His eyes held no surprise, only warning. Emily's hands were shaking so hard the wildflowers she held scattered across the wooden floor. She had been sold, traded for a debt her dead father never meant to leave behind, and nobody in that church was going to stop it. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The flowers hit the floor one by one, tiny white wildflowers. Emily had picked herself that morning because nobody had thought to buy her a real bouquet. That was the first sign, she supposed. You did not send a woman flowers when you had already purchased her. She had picked them herself. She had dressed herself. She had walked herself to this church on a dirt road that smelled of horse sweat and dry summer grass with her younger brother Caleb at her side, because there was nobody else left. Their mother had died when Caleb was 3. Their father had died 6 weeks ago, a fever that came fast and left nothing behind except 2 children, a failing farm, and a debt so large it swallowed all the daylight Emily could see ahead of her. She was 19 years old. She had never been kissed. She had never been courted. And now she was standing at the altar of the First Community Church of Harlan Creek, Montana Territory, in a white dress that belonged to somebody else's grandmother, about to become the 3rd wife of Richard Caldwell. Caldwell was 53 years old. His first wife had died of exhaustion. His second had run away in the night and was never spoken of again. He had silver hair and a silver watch chain, and a way of smiling that never quite reached his eyes. And when Emily's father had borrowed money from him 3 years ago to save the farm. Through a terrible winter, Caldwell had smiled exactly that way while he wrote the terms of the loan. "You'll pay me back come spring," he had said. Spring came. Spring went. The interest doubled. The farm struggled. Her father's hands worked harder than they were built to work, and the debt grew the way debts do when the man you owe wants something more than money. 6 weeks ago, her father died. 3 days after the funeral, Caldwell came to the door. He had not come to offer condolences. He had come with his lawyer and a document that transferred the deed of the Carter farm to Richard Caldwell, effective immediately, unless Emily agreed to a different arrangement. "The girl is old enough," he had said to the lawyer, as though Emily were not standing right there in the doorway, with her father's death still raw in her chest. "She's plain, but she's sturdy. She'll do. She'll do." Emily had not spoken. She had stood in the doorway of the only home she had ever known, and looked at this man and understood something she had never been taught, but somehow always feared that for women in Harlan Creek, Montana, in the year 1885, freedom was not a right. It was a luxury, and luxuries were for people who could afford them. She could not afford it. Caleb was 13 years old. He needed food. He needed shelter. He needed the farm to survive another winter, and there was nobody else. She said yes. Standing at the altar now. Emily told herself to be still. She told herself to breathe. She told herself that women had survived worse than this, that survival was its own kind of dignity, that she would find a way to protect Caleb and herself, even inside a life she had not chosen. She repeated these things like prayers. But then, Reverend Aldous Birch opened his Bible, and he looked at her with those pale eyes behind those thin wire spectacles, and he opened his mouth to speak the words that would seal her into this life permanently. And something inside Emily Carter simply broke. Not gently, not quietly. It broke the way ice breaks in late March when the temperature rises too fast, a sudden violent crack that splits the whole surface at once and cannot be undone. "I'm too young to be a wife." She said it before she knew she was saying it. Her voice came out wrong, too loud, too raw, cracking on the last word, and the wildflowers left her hands and hit the floor, and the whole church went still as a held breath. Caldwell turned to look at her. He did not look angry. That was the worst part. He looked patient. The way a man looks when he has all the time in the world and all the power in the room, and he knows the outcome is already decided. He looked at her the way you look at a horse that has spooked at something harmless. "Settle down. You'll tire yourself out." "Emily," His voice was low, a private warning dressed as a soft instruction. "This is not the moment." "I don't want this," Emily said. She had not planned to say anything else. But once the words started, they kept coming because she had been holding them back for 6 weeks, and grief and terror had been pressing on them the whole time. "I don't know you. I don't love you. My father borrowed money from you, that is all, and you are using his death to take everything we have and take me along with it, like I am a piece of furniture, and you are standing there looking at me like I should be grateful." "Emily Carter." Caldwell's voice dropped a full register. "You are making a scene in the house of God." "Then let me make it." Her voice shook so badly she could barely push the words through. "Somebody has to say it. Somebody has to say that this is wrong." The church was silent. Every face she could see was turned away. Old Mrs. Haverford in the third row was staring at her lap. Thomas and Ruth Aldridge, who had been her parents' closest friends, were looking at the ceiling. Deputy Greaves was examining his own boots with sudden intense interest. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because Richard Caldwell owned the mill and the general store and the largest parcel of land in Crawford County, and in a small frontier town, that kind of ownership extended past property lines. It reached into people's livelihoods, their loans, their leases, their futures. Standing against Richard Caldwell was not a small decision. It was the kind of decision that could make a family disappear quietly from a place over the course of a year, like smoke going up a chimney. Everyone in that church knew it. So everyone in that church looked away. Emily felt it then, the particular loneliness of being in a room full of people and knowing you are completely alone. She had felt it when her mother died. She had felt it when her father closed his eyes for the last time. But this was different. This was people choosing not to see her. And that particular kind of invisible was the worst kind. She started to fold. She could feel it happening. Her voice running out her defiance, caving under the weight of the silence, her whole body preparing to simply surrender, because what else was there to do? The church doors opened. He did not make an entrance. That was the thing about Nathan Reed. He never made entrances. He walked through doorways the way he did everything else, quietly, deliberately, without drama. And the only reason the whole church noticed him was that nobody was supposed to walk through those doors after the ceremony had begun. I was 34 years old, lean and sun-weathered, with the particular kind of stillness that comes not from laziness, but from a man who has learned that the wrong movement at the wrong moment costs more than the right one later. He wore his everyday work clothes: dark trousers, a worn canvas jacket, a gray hat. He did not remove when he stepped inside, which was either a sign of disrespect or a sign that he had not come to stay. Emily had seen Nathan Reed a handful of times at the general store or the feed merchant. She knew him by reputation, the way everyone did. Kept to himself. Had a ranch east of town with good horses and no neighbors he voluntarily spoke to. Lost someone years ago, a woman, people said. Though nobody knew the details because Nathan Reed did not share details. Lived alone. Worked hard. Did not attend church, did not attend socials, did not attend anything he was not required to attend. He had no reason to be here. He stopped just inside the doorway and looked at the altar. He looked at Caldwell. He looked at Emily. And something moved across his face, not pity, she would later think. Something more careful than pity. Something like recognition. Like a man who had seen the shape of this situation before in some other form, in some other place, and had filed it away in the part of his memory where he kept the things he could not forgive himself for not stopping. "What is the meaning of this?" Caldwell said, not loud, but certain. Nathan looked at him. "I need a word with the Reverend. This is a private ceremony. You're not invited." "It'll take 1 minute." Nathan walked up the center aisle without hurrying his boots, slow and even on the wooden floor. He stopped 3 feet from the altar and looked at Reverend Birch. "Reverend, before you proceed, is this woman here willingly?" The silence had a different quality now. Birch looked at Caldwell, then at Nathan. His voice came out carefully thin. "That is not a question that—" "It's a yes or no question," Nathan said. "Is she here willingly?" Caldwell stepped forward. "You have no standing here, Reed. You have no legal right, no social standing, and no— I'm asking the Reverend. And no business walking into a private ceremony and questioning a legal contract that was signed and witnessed and filed with the county clerk. Reverend Birch. Nathan Reed's voice never rose. That was the thing that silenced everyone. He did not raise his voice. He simply directed it with the kind of precision that made raising it unnecessary. The Reverend swallowed. His Adam's apple moved visibly. He did not look at Caldwell. He looked at Emily. And Emily, because she had nothing left to lose, and the crack was already there, said clearly, "No, I am not here willingly. I was given no other choice." The church exhaled. Nathan turned to Caldwell. "Then this wedding isn't happening." What happened next took approximately 90 seconds, and Emily would spend years afterward reconstructing it, because in the moment it happened so fast and so completely that she could not hold all of it at once. Caldwell's face changed. The patience went out of it like a lamp being turned down, and what was underneath was something much colder and much more honest. "You have any idea what you're doing, Reed?" "I do." "You're throwing away everything you own for a girl you don't even know, maybe?" Nathan's eyes did not move from Caldwell's face. "But she said she's not here willingly, in a church, in front of witnesses. That means this marriage can't proceed, not legally, not morally, not any way that stands. I have a signed contract. A contract with her father who is dead. She didn't sign anything." Nathan glanced briefly at the lawyer standing against the wall, a thin, nervous man named Pruitt, who was already edging toward the door. "Did she—" Pruitt said nothing, but his face said everything. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "This is not finished." "No," Nathan agreed quietly. "It's not, but it's finished for today." He turned to Emily. "Ma'am, do you want to leave?" Emily looked at him. This stranger, this man who had walked in from nowhere with no reason and no obligation and nothing to gain. This man who was going to make an enemy of the most powerful person in Crawford County because a girl he had never spoken to had dropped her flowers and said she didn't want to be here. "Yes," she said. "I want to leave." "Then let's go." He did not take her arm. He did not touch her at all. He simply turned and walked back down the aisle toward the open doors, and Emily picked up the hem of that borrowed dress and followed him, and the whole church watched them go, and nobody said a word. Not a single word. Outside, the summer heat pressed down like a hand. Emily stood beside Nathan Reed's horse, a bay mare steady and dark, and breathed in great ragged pulls of air, and shook so hard her teeth clattered. Nathan stood a few feet away with his back to the church doors and watched the street. "Are you injured?" he asked. "No." "Can you ride?" She had grown up on a farm. She had been riding since before she could read. "Yes. We need to move. He'll be out here inside 5 minutes with Greaves." Emily looked down at her. The borrowed dress. The bare feet her shoes were still inside the church she had not noticed until now, had not thought past the moment of leaving. "I have a brother, Caleb. He's 13. He's at the farm." Nathan had already thought of it. "Where's the farm?" 2 miles north, past the ridge." He was already moving toward the mare. "Get up." Emily had never ridden in a dress. She managed awkwardly swinging up while Nathan held the horse's head and looked toward the church. Behind them the doors opened. She heard Caldwell's voice sharp and carrying. Nathan mounted up behind her without hesitation. "Hold on," he said quietly, and the mare moved. The Carter farm looked like grief. It was not a cruel thought, it was simply true. It looked exactly the way a place looks when the person who loved it most has recently stopped being alive. The fence posts that needed mending were still unmended. The gate her father had always meant to rehang was still propped against the post. The kitchen garden her mother had planted 15 years ago, and her father had tended faithfully every season since, was overgrown with August weeds. Caleb was in the barn. He came out when he heard hoofbeats already frowning, the particular frown of a 13-year-old boy who has been carrying more weight than 13-year-olds are built to carry, and he stopped when he saw the horse and the man he did not know, and his sister in a white dress she had borrowed from a woman at church who expected to get it back after a wedding ceremony. Emily. He looked at the dress. At Nathan. Back at Emily. What happened? I left. You left. Caleb's voice was carefully flat. You left the wedding. I left the wedding. And Caldwell. He will come here. Emily slid off the horse before Nathan could assist her and crossed the yard to her brother and took his face in her hands. He was getting tall. He had their father's jaw and their mother's eyes, and he was trying very hard right now not to look frightened. Caleb, listen to me. We cannot stay here tonight. This is our farm. I know. This is our farm and I'm not going to... Caleb. She said it gently, but she said it firmly. If Caldwell comes here tonight, the deputy will be with him, and there is nothing we can do that won't make it worse. You understand? We need to leave tonight. We can fight for this later. We cannot fight it tonight. He pulled away from her hands. Not in anger in the particular way of a person who is accepting something they cannot change and needs a moment to do it quietly. Where do we go? He asked. My ranch, Nathan said from behind them. Both Carters turned to look at him. He was still on the horse. He said it simply without elaboration, the way a man states a fact that he has considered and decided and does not need to justify. It's 12 miles east, he said. Far enough that Caldwell won't come tonight. Close enough that we can deal with this properly in the morning. Caleb looked at his sister. Who is this man? Nathan Reed, Emily said. Why is he helping us? The question landed in the yard between all three of them, and Nathan did not immediately answer it. He looked at the boy with something like respect, the respect a man gives a question that is direct and deserved. Because somebody should have helped you sooner, Nathan said. And nobody did. Get what you need. We leave in 20 minutes. They were packed in 15. Emily moved through the farmhouse the way you move through a place you are leaving. Under terrible circumstances, fast with purpose, not looking at things too long, because looking too long leads to remembering, and remembering leads to breaking down, and breaking down was not something she could afford right now. She took her father's journal. She took the small tin box where her mother had kept letters. She took Caleb's winter coat and her own, and the little money that remained from selling eggs at the market through the summer. She took the deed to the farm, the original deed, the one in her father's handwriting, the one that predated Caldwell's claim. She did not take the white dress. She changed back into her own clothes and left the borrowed dress folded on the table, and felt with a clarity that startled her that she was leaving something behind more than fabric. Some version of herself that had agreed to stay quiet and stay still and stay small enough to fit into whatever space other people decided she was allowed. She was done with that version. She didn't know yet what the other version looked like, but she was done with that one. They rode east as the sun dropped toward the mountain line. Nathan led with Caleb on the second horse they'd taken from the barn, her father's old gray Clover, who needed the exercise anyway. Emily rode behind Nathan on the bay mare, and did not speak for the first several miles, and he did not speak either, and she found she was grateful for the silence. A man who could be quiet was something she had not expected. After a while she said, without planning to, "Why did you come to the church?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was riding past. Heard something." "You heard me." "Heard a woman's voice where there shouldn't be that particular sound in a church." She thought about that. "You could have kept riding." "Yes." "You've seen Caldwell before. You know what he is." "Everybody knows what he is." "Then you knew what you were walking into." "Yes." She waited. He didn't add anything. She said, "That doesn't answer why." Nathan Reed looked straight ahead between the mare's ears at the long amber light crossing the grass. "My mother," he said finally, "was sold into a marriage when she was 17. Her family needed money. The man who married her was not cruel. The way some men are cruel. He didn't strike her. He didn't shout. He simply owned her. She spent 30 years being owned quietly by a man who never once asked her what she wanted." He paused. "She never told me that directly. I understood it watching them. There are things you understand as a child that you don't have the words for yet." Emily said nothing. She held those words carefully. "You had the words," he said. "You said them in front of everyone. That took something most people don't have." "It was stupid," she said. "I have nowhere to go, no money, and I just made the most powerful man in the county my enemy. You had no choice. I always had a choice. Everyone kept saying I had no choice, but what they meant was the other choices were too painful to look at directly." She looked at the back of his neck. "The choice to run. The choice to say no. The choice to make a scene in the middle of a church and lose everything." "You didn't lose everything." "I lost the farm. You didn't sign anything." He said it quietly but with certainty. "His claim is based on your father's debt and a verbal agreement that was coerced. Prewitt knows it. Birch knows it. It won't hold up in a territorial court if it's properly challenged." She stared at him. "You know the law." "I've had reasons to learn it." "What reasons?" He didn't answer that. She let it go. There was time. She didn't know yet why she believed there was time, but she did. Nathan Reed's ranch came into view as the first stars appeared. It was a working ranch, not beautiful by design, but purposeful and solid. And Emily, who had grown up on land and understood what land looked like when someone tended it properly, could see immediately that it was tended properly. The fences were sound. The barn was large and well kept. The house was plain, 2 stories unpainted wood, nothing decorative, but the porch had a chair on it and a lamp in the window, and small things like that tell you more about a person than they realize. Caleb had fallen asleep in the saddle, which Nathan caught before it became a problem, steadying the boy with one hand, with no ceremony about it. Inside the house, Nathan lit lamps and showed them where to sleep. Caleb in a small room off the hall. Emily in the upstairs room that was used, she could tell, as storage for things the house did not have another place for. There was a cot rolled against the wall, and he unrolled it without comment and brought a blanket from the hall closet. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. Pumps in the kitchen. Water should still be warm from this afternoon. "Thank you," Emily said. He nodded and started to leave. "Mr. Reed." He stopped in the doorway. She had been thinking about what to say. She had not found the right thing. She said the true thing instead. "You have put everything you own at risk tonight because of me. I need you to know that I understand that. And I need you to know that I will not be a burden. I will work. I will contribute. I will not hide here and wait for you to solve this for me." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. She blinked. "You don't know me. I watched you stand up in that church in front of everyone who was looking the other way and say something that was true and terrifying and true, regardless of how terrifying it was." He said it without decoration. "I know enough." He pulled the door mostly shut behind him. Emily stood in the lamplight of the small storage room, with her father's journal against her chest, and the road dust of 12 miles still on her face, and the sound of her brother breathing steadily in the room across the hall. For the first time in 6 weeks, she did not feel like she was drowning. She still had no idea what came next. But for the first time in a very long time, she believed that what came next was something she might have some say in. She blew out the lamp. Below her she could hear Nathan Reed moving through the house, banking the fire, checking the door. The steady, quiet sounds of a man settling a household for the night. Not a perfect man, not a simple man. A man with his own damage, his own closed doors, his own reasons for knowing the law and keeping his distance and walking into a church he had no reason to be in. But a man who had seen her. Actually seen her. And right now, in the particular darkness of an unfamiliar room, in an unfamiliar house, at the beginning of something she could not yet see. The shape of, that was enough. What Emily Carter did not know, could not know. Lying on that cot with her eyes open to the dark ceiling, was that 12 miles away in Harlan Creek. Richard Caldwell was not raging. I was not shouting. He was not throwing things. He was sitting in his office with a lamp burning and his lawyer across the table, and his hands folded on the desk with the patience that had always been his real weapon, not money, not power, not connections. Though he had all of those, his real weapon was the certainty that he could wait longer than anyone else was willing to. "The Reed Ranch," he said. Prewitt shifted in his chair. We don't know. She went to the Reed Ranch. He has nowhere else to take her. Pull everything we have on Reed's property title. I want to know if there are any liens, any irregularities, anything that gives us a legal avenue. Sir, what happened today in the church? The girl's statement in front of witnesses was the statement of a frightened girl who doesn't understand contracts. Caldwell's voice was absolutely flat. Her father signed. Her father's debts transferred. The farm is mine by any reasonable legal interpretation, and I intend to enforce it. What I need, he leaned forward slightly, is leverage on Reed. Prewitt was quiet. Find it, Caldwell said. He blew out the lamp on his desk. In the dark, he was still smiling that smile that never reached his eyes. Emily Carter thought she had won something today. Richard Caldwell knew she had only survived long enough to give him time to respond properly. And Richard Caldwell had been responding properly to obstacles for 30 years. He was very good at it. The morning after the wedding, that never happened, Emily woke before the sun. She lay on the cot in the storage room and listened to the house breathe around her, and told herself the same thing she had been telling herself since she was 14 years old and her mother died, and everything fell to her figure. Out what needs doing first, and do that. What needed doing first was breakfast. She found the kitchen by feel in the gray pre-dawn dark, found the stove and the firewood stacked beside it and the coffee tin on the shelf above. And by the time light was coming through the windows, she had a fire going and water heating, and had located eggs and cured pork in the cold box, and was standing at the stove when Nathan Reed came through the kitchen doorway and stopped. He looked at the stove, at the coffee, at Emily in her own clothes with her hair braided back and her sleeves rolled to the elbow. You didn't have to do that, he said. I told you last night I wasn't going to be a burden. She didn't look up from the pan. Sit down, it's almost ready. He sat. I was quiet the way he had been quiet last night on the ride out. Not the uncomfortable quiet of a man who doesn't know what to say, but the settled quiet of a man who doesn't say things unless they're worth saying. Emily had grown up with a father like that. She found she trusted it. Caleb came down 20 minutes later, sleep, rumpled and suspicious, and ate 3 portions without speaking, which Emily took as a sign that he was all right. When Caleb was truly frightened, he couldn't eat. The fact that he was eating enough for 2 grown men meant he was frightened, but managing it. After breakfast, Nathan put his coffee cup down and said, "We need to talk about what comes next." "Yes," Emily said. "Caldwell will move fast. He'll file something with the county clerk within the next day or 2, some kind of legal action to establish his claim on the farm, and if he can manage it, an accusation against me. Kidnapping most likely, or interference with a legal contract." Caleb looked up sharply. "He can't. He can file whatever he wants," Nathan said. "Filing isn't the same as winning, but it creates pressure. It forces us to respond. And responding costs money and time, and he knows we have less of both than he does." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "So we need to move before he does." Emily set her own cup down. "What does that mean, move?" "It means finding anyone else Caldwell has done this to. Coerced, manipulated, trapped in a contract they didn't understand or couldn't refuse." His eyes were steady on hers. "A man doesn't invent something like this at 53. He perfects it. There are other people out there with your family's story." Caleb said quietly, "There's the Brennan family." Both adults looked at him. He shrugged, but his jaw was set, the way their father's jaw had set when he was making himself say something difficult. "Thomas Brennan. He's in my class at school. His family lost their land 2 years ago. Or not lost, his father signed something. He doesn't talk about it, but I know because he stopped bringing lunch after it happened, and his sister Agnes left school." Emily looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Caleb with the expression of a man recalculating something. "That's helpful," he said. "That's very helpful." Caleb looked briefly fiercely pleased with himself, and then hid it by looking back at his plate. Nathan rode into town alone that morning. Emily wanted to come. He told her directly that it was better she didn't not, because she wasn't capable, but because Caldwell's men would be watching the roads out of Harlan Creek for any sign of her, and her being seen before they were ready would hand Caldwell information he could use. She didn't argue because she recognized the logic even while she disliked it. She spent the morning instead doing what she always did when she was frightened and couldn't act directly. She worked. She found the barn and spent an hour with the horses learning their names and temperaments the way her father had taught her. Slowly speaking, softly, letting them learn her smell before she asked anything of them. There were 6 horses, the bay mare, a black gelding. Nathan used for heavy work, 2 working quarter horses, and 2 younger animals that were clearly being trained for sale. They were good horses, well-handled, patient. You could tell a great deal about a person from how their animals behaved. Caleb found her in the barn, mid-morning. "What do we do if he doesn't find anything?" Caleb said. Not asking if he was 13, but he was a 13-year-old who had spent a year watching a debt grow while his father's hands got slower and he had lost the luxury of pretending things would work out automatically. "Then we find another way," Emily said. "What other way?" She turned to look at her brother across the back of the black gelding. "The deed, Caleb. The original deed to the farm. Dad's name is on it. Caldwell's claim is based on a loan agreement and a verbal arrangement that was never written down properly. He has a lawyer. So does Nathan, apparently." She said it with more confidence than she felt. "And a bad contract filed properly is still a bad contract, Emily." Caleb said her name the way her father used to, not as a beginning to something, but as a landing. A way of making sure she was actually hearing him rather than just managing him. "Are you scared?" She looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. "I'm terrified. Are you?" "Yes." He said it with the particular relief of someone who has been carrying a secret that isn't actually a secret. "Good," Emily said. "People who aren't scared make stupid decisions. We're going to make smart ones." He almost smiled. Almost. Nathan came back in the early afternoon, and he was not alone. The man with him was someone Emily had never seen younger than Nathan, compact and quick-looking, with a clay dust-colored coat, and the alert expression of a man who was paid to notice things other people missed. "This is Martin Foles," Nathan said, swinging down from the mare. "He's a land surveyor. He also knows more about fraudulent contracts in Crawford County than anyone working outside the law." Foles tipped his hat at Emily. He had dark, bright eyes and a scar along his chin that turned his smile slightly crooked. "Ma'am, I heard what happened yesterday. Took some courage." "It took some panic," Emily said honestly. He liked that. She could see it. Inside at the kitchen table, Nathan laid out what he had found. He spread it flat between them, not documents, not yet, but information. "Caldwell filed this morning," he said. "Trespass charge against me, and an abandonment claim against you, the argument being that you left a legally binding arrangement of your own free will and therefore forfeited any claim to the farm." Emily felt the cold of it move through her chest. Abandonment. As though I'm the one who walked away. "It's legally creative," Foles said without admiration. "It won't hold in a territorial court with a competent judge. The problem is, the nearest territorial court is in Helena, which is 3 days' ride, and Caldwell has a judge here in Crawford County who owes him money." "Judge Harker," Nathan said. "Judge Harker," Foles confirmed. Caleb, sitting at the end of the table, said carefully, "Can he make it go in front of Judge Harker instead of the territorial court?" Foles looked at the boy with the same recalibrating expression Nathan had used that morning. "Smart kid." "Answer the question," Caleb said. "He can try," Foles said. "That's exactly what he's going to try. It's why we need to move faster than he does." Nathan had his hands flat on the table. "Martin tracked down the Brennan family this morning. Patrick Brennan. He signed a contract 2 years ago, almost identical structure to your father's. High-interest loan, impossible repayment terms, forfeiture clause buried on the 3rd page in language that wasn't explained to him." Emily looked up. "He still has the contract." "He has it," Foles said. "He's been too scared to use it because Caldwell holds the lease on the building where his wife operates a small dressmaking business. One word from Caldwell, and she loses the space." He paused. "But he kept it. People always keep the paper that was used to hurt them. I don't know why, evidence, I suppose, or maybe just to remind themselves that what happened to them was real." The table was quiet. Then Emily said, "I want to talk to him." Nathan shook his head slightly. Emily. Not you, she said. Me. A man I've never met isn't going to trust a stranger who says he's trying to help. But his wife knows me. Agnes Brennan's mother. Mrs. Brennan. She knew my mother. They were in the same church quilting circle for 10 years. She looked at Nathan directly. She will talk to me. She won't talk to you. Nathan held her gaze for a long moment. All right, he said. Tonight, Emily said. After dark. Foles raised an eyebrow. You're not cautious. I'm very cautious, Emily said. I'm also running out of time. Cautious and fast aren't the same thing, but they're not opposites either. That evening before Emily left for the Brennan place, something happened that she had not expected. She was in the barn saddling the gray because Clover knew her and would be quiet about it. And Nathan came in and stood with his arms crossed watching her work and then said without preamble, I had a wife. Emily stopped. She turned around slowly. I was not looking at her. He was looking at a point somewhere past her right shoulder, and his jaw was doing the thing it did when he was making himself say something he would normally leave unsaid. Her name was Clara. We were married for 2 years. She died fever same as your father, though it moved faster than it should have. The doctor said later, it might have been preventable if we'd gotten her to Helena in time. He stopped. We didn't get her to Helena in time because I waited. I thought she would recover. I thought if I waited another day and see if she improved. I kept waiting, and she kept not improving, and by the time I stopped waiting, it was too late to matter. Emily said nothing. She let the silence hold what it needed to hold. I'm telling you this, Nathan said, because you need to understand who you've got helping you. I'm not a man who acts fast. I waited when I shouldn't have. I stayed out of other people's situations because I didn't want to be wrong again the way I was wrong then. He finally looked at her. Walking into that church yesterday, that was the first time in 6 years that I've moved towards something instead of away from it. And I need you to know that it matters to me that we do this right. Not fast, right. Emily understood not just what he said, but what he had not said. The weight under it, the years under it. We'll do both, she said quietly. Fast and right. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. But something in that direction, moving slowly toward it, the way weather moves across a mountain range. Be careful tonight, he said. I will. Caldwell's men will be watching the Brennan property. I know. If you see anyone, Nathan. She said his name directly for the first time. He stopped. I grew up on a farm where the nearest neighbor was a mile away, and my father worked from before dawn to after dark. And I was responsible for my brother and the household before I was old enough to have been. I know how to move quietly at night. I know how to read land and light and sound. She held his gaze. I don't need to be protected from the dark. I need to be trusted to handle it. Nathan Reed looked at Emily Carter in the lamplight of his barn. You're right, he said simply. I trust you. Mrs. Brennan opened her door and put her hand over her mouth. Emily Carter, she said. Child, come in before someone sees you. Inside the Brennan house. It smelled like bread and lamp oil, and something that reminded Emily achingly of her own mother's kitchen. And she sat at the Brennan table, while Helen Brennan pressed tea into her hands, and Patrick Brennan sat across from her with his hands wrapped around his own cup, and the expression of a man who has been ashamed of himself for so long that the shame has calcified into something nearly indistinguishable from exhaustion. I know why you're here, Patrick said. Then I won't waste your time explaining it, Emily said. He looked at her carefully. He was a big, slow-spoken man, the kind whose gentleness came precisely from knowing his own strength and choosing not to use it carelessly. What you did yesterday in that church, my wife told me. Half the town has probably told you by now. But Helen was the one crying when she told me. He glanced at his wife, who was looking at the window. She said she should have stood up. She said we should have stood up 2 years ago when it happened to us. He was quiet for a moment. She's right. We should have. You had children to protect, Emily said. The same reason I almost didn't. He looked at her. Really looked at her. And now Caldwell has filed legal action against me and against the man who helped me. And if I don't find evidence that his contracts are fraudulent, a corrupt judge in this county is going to rule in his favor, and I will lose my family's farm, and Nathan Reed will lose his ranch." She kept her voice level and direct. "I need your contract, Mr. Brennan. The original. I need to show a territorial court what he does, and how he does it, and who else he has done it to." The kitchen was very quiet. Patrick Brennan looked at his wife. Helen Brennan turned from the window. Her eyes were red, but her voice was not. "Get it, Patrick," she said. "Get it right now." Emily rode back to Nathan's ranch with the Brennan contract inside her coat pressed against her ribs. She had gotten halfway home when she heard the hoofbeats behind her. Not fast, not chasing, following, pacing her. She did not look back. She kept her pace steady and her hands loose on the reins and moved her route 3 degrees north toward the ridge where the tree line would give her cover, and when she had cover, she stopped and turned. 2 riders. Caldwell's men. She recognized one of them, a lean man named Sutter, who worked Caldwell's western fence. They had stopped on the road below, looking up at the tree line. They knew she had left the road. They didn't know exactly where she was. She held Clover absolutely still. The horses below shifted. Sutter said something to the other man in a low voice. They waited. Emily waited. 3 full minutes in the dark. Not breathing loud. Not moving. Then Sutter turned his horse south, and they rode away. Emily stayed in the trees for 10 more minutes before she moved again. When she reached the ranch, Nathan was waiting on the porch, not pacing, standing, still. He was someone who expressed worry through stillness rather than movement, she was learning. She pulled the contract from inside her coat and held it up. He came off the porch in 3 steps. "Brennan gave it to you. Patrick and Helen both did." She handed it to him. He wasn't going to at first. His wife changed his mind. Nathan turned the document over in his hands and then looked at her. "Caldwell's men. Sutter and someone I didn't recognize. They followed me off the main road. I lost them at the ridge." She watched his face. "I told you I could handle the dark." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes, you did. Did you doubt it?" "No." He said it without hesitation. "I was still worried." She recognized something in that distinction, the difference between doubting and worrying. One was about her capability. The other was something else entirely. She let it sit between them without examining it too closely. "Foles needs to see this tonight," she said. "I'll ride to him. Take Caleb with you. He needs to feel like he's doing something useful, or he's going to do something unilateral and unhelpful." Nathan almost smiled. The corner of his mouth moved. "You manage him like that." "I've been managing him since he was 3. She turned toward the house. "Don't be gone more than 2 hours. Caldwell's men knowing I was out tonight means he'll know I was doing something. He'll move fast tomorrow." "I know." Nathan was already moving toward the barn. Then he stopped and looked back at her. "Emily." She paused. "What Brennan gave you tonight, that's the first real evidence we have. That matters." "I know it does." "It means this is winnable." She held his gaze in the thin porch light. "I knew it was winnable before tonight," she said. "But now I can prove it." She was still awake when they came back 2 hours later, almost to the minute. Foles came in behind Nathan and Caleb and spread the Brennan contract on the kitchen table beside the one Emily had found in her father's things, and the 3 adults stood around it, while Caleb sat on the counter with his arms folded and watched. Foles read both documents with the attention of a man who has been reading fine print for a living long enough to see patterns in it. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "The forfeiture clauses." He pointed. Nathan and Emily both leaned in. "Here, and here." He indicated identical language in both contracts. Identical wording, word for word. This isn't a coincidence. This language was drafted by someone who planned to use it repeatedly. He looked up. "This is a system, not an opportunistic debt collection. A deliberate system for acquiring land through manufactured debt." Emily said, "How many families?" "Can't say for certain, but if I had to guess." He looked at Nathan. You remember what happened to the old Harmon place? Nathan's expression changed. 3 years ago, old George Harmon sold up suddenly. I always thought it was strange he'd been on that land for 20 years. Sold up, Foles said. Or was sold out. He tapped the contracts. Same forfeiture language. I'd bet my surveying kit on it. The kitchen was very quiet. Then Caleb said from the counter, "So it's not just us." "No," Foles said. "It's not just you." Caleb looked at his sister. Something moved through his expression. Anger. Emily thought clean and clarifying, the kind of anger that doesn't make you stupid, but makes you focused. "Good," he said. "Then when we stop him for everyone." Emily looked at her brother, this 13-year-old boy who had their father's jaw and their mother's eyes, and who had been carrying far too much for far too long, and felt something she had not expected to feel in the middle of all of this. Pride. Nathan looked at Caleb too, and then at Emily, and neither of them said anything, because sometimes understanding passes between people without words. In the middle of the night, in a kitchen, in a ranch house, 12 miles from a town that had looked away, 3 people, who had no particular reason to trust each other, had put their hands on the same problem and decided they were going to solve it together. And Richard Caldwell, 12 miles away in his large house with his silver watch chain and his patient smile, had absolutely no idea what was coming. That was the first time Emily allowed herself to feel something that was not quite hope, but was close enough to it that in the dark it was almost indistinguishable. Almost. The next morning came in hard and fast. Emily heard the horses before she was fully awake. Multiple riders moving with the particular speed of men who have been given instructions and are following them before they have time to think too carefully about whether the instructions are right. She was on her feet before the sound reached the porch, and Nathan was already in the hallway when she came out of her room, his boots on, his expression telling her everything before he said a word. "How many?" she asked. "4, maybe 5. He moved past her toward the front of the house. "Get Caleb up. Back door. Now." "Nathan." "I'm not running." He said it without turning around. "I just need you and your brother not to be in the middle of whatever this is about to be." Emily went to Caleb's door and pushed it open. He was already awake, sitting on the edge of the cot with his boots in his hands, because Caleb had always been a light sleeper and a fast processor, and he looked at her face and stood up immediately. "Back door," he said. "Back door," she confirmed. She put him in the barn with the horses and told him to stay there and to saddle Clover and the black gelding quietly and to not come out under any circumstances unless she came for him or the barn caught fire. He opened his mouth to argue. She gave him the look that had been working on him since he was 4 years old. He closed his mouth and picked up the saddle. She went back to the front of the house. She was not going to hide in a barn while Nathan Reed faced 5 men alone because of her. She had been very clear about that the night before, and she was still clear about it now. The man who had sent the riders was not Caldwell himself. It was Deputy Greaves, the same man who had been examining his boots so carefully during the interrupted wedding, now sitting straight-backed on a big roan horse in Nathan's front yard, with an expression that was trying very hard to look official, and not quite managing it, because Greaves was not a bad man. Emily had always thought. He was a frightened one, which was a different thing, and sometimes more dangerous. "Nathan Reed," Greaves said. Nathan stood on his porch with his arms at his sides. He had not reached for the rifle visible in the doorway behind him, which Emily thought showed considerable self-control. "Tom," Nathan said. Greaves shifted in the saddle. "I have a warrant, filed this morning with Judge Harker." "For what?" Greaves looked at the paper in his hand. He looked like a man who wished he were somewhere else. Unlawful interference with a legal contract, and, he paused briefly, harboring a person in breach of a civil agreement. Emily stepped out onto the porch beside Nathan. Greaves blinked. The 3 men behind him exchanged glances. "Tom," she said, "you came to school with my father for 6 years. You ate at our table. My mother made you a quilt when you married Ruth." Greaves's jaw tightened. "Emily, this isn't personal." "It is entirely personal," she said. A man is using the law as a weapon to take my family's land and force a 19-year-old girl into marriage to pay a debt she never agreed to, and you're here with a warrant and 4 men, because that's easier than looking at what's actually happening." She kept her voice steady. She had found something in the last 2 days that she had not known. She possessed the ability to be furious and controlled at the same time, to let the anger sharpen her words instead of scattering them. "I want you to hear yourself, Tom. I want you to actually hear what you're doing." One of the men behind Greaves coughed. Greaves looked at the paper again. "I have legal instructions." "From Judge Harker," Nathan said, "who owes Caldwell approximately $4,000 in gambling debts." Dead silence. Greaves's head came up. "Where did you hear that? Is it untrue?" The deputy said nothing. The silence said everything. "Tom." Nathan stepped off the porch. He kept his hands visible and his voice even, and he walked to the edge of the yard and stopped close enough to speak normally. "I know you're in a hard position. I know Caldwell owns the building your brother rents for his dry goods store, and I know that if Caldwell says a word to the right person, your brother loses that lease by next winter." He paused. "I'm not asking you to be brave on our behalf today. I'm asking you to go back to Harker and tell him that you couldn't locate the parties named in the warrant. That buys us 3 days. Greaves stared at him. "You're asking me to lie to a judge?" "I'm asking you to give a young woman 3 days to save her family's land through legal means." Nathan held his gaze. "And I'm telling you that when this is over, and it is going to be over, Tom, one way or another, the side you were standing on is going to matter. Not to Caldwell. To the people in this town who have to live here after he's gone." The yard was very quiet. One of the riders shifted his horse. Leather creaked. Greaves folded the warrant and put it in his coat pocket. He looked at Emily, then at Nathan, then back at Emily. "I couldn't locate the parties," he said flatly and precisely. "I'll file my report this afternoon." He turned his horse and the men behind him turned with him, and they rode back down the road without looking back. Emily let the breath out slowly through her nose. Nathan came back up the porch steps. He was not triumphant. He didn't do triumphant. She was learning the same way he didn't do panic. He simply moved to the next thing. 3 days, he said. "Then we have 3 days, Emily said. "Foles. Can he reach the territorial court in Helena?" "He left last night." Nathan looked at her. "I sent him before we went to bed. He took copies of both contracts." Emily stared at him. "You sent him before we even knew about the warrant. Caldwell filed legal action yesterday. I knew something was coming this morning." He said it simply without self-congratulation. "Foles is faster than anyone Caldwell can send. If he rides hard, he can have copies in front of a territorial judge by day after tomorrow." Emily thought about this man who had walked into a church on instinct and had been 6 moves ahead ever since, quietly without announcing it. "You've been planning since yesterday," she said. "Since the night before yesterday," he said. "Since you fell asleep and I sat by the fire." She looked at him for a long moment. "Nathan, why didn't you tell me?" He met her eyes. "Because you had enough to carry last night without me adding weight to it. That wasn't yours yet. The Brennan contract was yours to get. This was mine to handle. We were both doing what we could do." A pause. "That's how it works, isn't it?" She didn't have an answer for that immediately. Not because she didn't understand it, but because she did, and it was a thing. She needed a moment to absorb the concept of someone distributing a burden without being asked, without making you feel the distribution. "Yes," she said finally. "That's how it works." The second day brought George Harmon. He came on his own, which surprised all of them, a heavy-set man in his late 60s with thick white eyebrows and hands that had spent 40 years in the ground. And he came to Nathan's door mid-morning, while Nathan and Emily were at the kitchen table, going over what they had, and he knocked twice and waited. When Nathan opened the door, Harmon said without greeting, "I heard what the girl did at the church." "Her name is Emily Carter," Nathan said. "I know her name. I knew her father." Harmon looked past Nathan to where Emily had come to stand in the hallway. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully read. Complex waited. Her father was a good man. He was, Emily said. Harmon looked back at Nathan. Can I come in? At the table. Harmon put his own contract down. It was older than the others, more worn, the folds deep and soft from being handled many times. Emily recognized it immediately as the document of a man who had been living with it for years, taking it out and putting it back, unable to act on it and unable to let it go. 3 years ago, Harmon said. Same as the Brennans. I had a bad season. Late frost took the wheat. I was short on the bank payment. Caldwell came to me with a loan offer. He turned his cup around in his hands. I thought he was being neighborly. We'd known each other for 15 years. I thought... He stopped. I should have read the 3rd page more carefully. The forfeiture clause, Emily said. He looked at her. You know about it. It's in every contract he writes. She spread the 3 documents on the table beside each other. The language is identical, word for word. This was designed. Harmon stared at the 3 contracts side by side. Something moved through his face that was terrible to watch. Not grief exactly, but the specific anguish of a man who has spent 3 years believing he made a private mistake and is now discovering. It was never private, never a mistake, but a trap that had been set for him specifically and for others deliberately by design. He picked people, Harmon said. It came out very quietly. He picked people who were already struggling, people who couldn't afford to fight him after. Yes, Emily said. That's... He stopped. His jaw worked. That's not a debt collector. That's a predator. Yes, Emily said again. Harmon put his hand flat on the contracts. His old rancher's hand thick-knuckled and sun-darkened. What do you need from me? Your contract, Emily said. Your testimony if it comes to that. And your willingness to stand up in front of a territorial court and say what happened to you. She held his gaze. I won't ask you to do it if you're not willing. I won't pretend it isn't a risk. Caldwell still has influence in this county. Harmon was quiet for a long moment. My wife died 2 years ago, he said apparently at random. Then, she was buried on that land, the land I had to sell because of that contract. He looked up. I go by sometimes, to visit her grave. Except it's not my land anymore, so technically I'm trespassing every time. He said the last part with a flatness that was louder than anger. You tell me what to do, and I'll do it. I'm 68 years old, and I'm done being afraid of that man. Emily reached across the table and put her hand on top of his. She didn't say anything. Sometimes there wasn't anything useful to say. Harmon cleared his throat and looked at the window. Nathan quietly refilled everyone's coffee. The twist came on the morning of the 3rd day, and it came from a direction none of them had anticipated. It came from Reverend Birch. The Reverend came to the ranch alone on foot, which meant he had walked 3 miles on a bad knee in early September heat, and when Emily opened the door, he looked like a man who had been arguing with himself the entire distance and had only barely won. Miss Carter. His voice was thin and careful. I need to speak with Mr. Reed. Emily stepped back to let him in. You can speak to both of us. In the kitchen, which had become 3 days. Something like a war room and something like a home. The line between the two, growing increasingly unclear. Birch sat down and folded his hands on the table and looked at them. I've been approached, he said. By Caldwell, Nathan said. By his lawyer Prewitt. Birch's thin fingers tightened against each other. He came to the party last evening with a proposition. Caldwell is willing to, and I'm using his words, let the matter of the Carter farm rest unchallenged in exchange for a sworn statement from me that Emily Carter left the ceremony willingly and that no coercion of any kind was present. The kitchen was absolutely still. Emily felt it like cold water across the back of her neck. He wants you to lie. He wants me to provide a legal statement that supports his version of events. Birch said it with precision, as though the precision of the description was the only thing he could control right now. He said it very politely. That is what he does, I am learning. Everything is done very politely. What did you tell Prewitt? Nathan asked. I told him I needed to pray on it. Birch looked up from his hands. I have been praying on it since last evening. The result of my prayers is that I am here, which I believe speaks for itself, though I recognize it may not constitute the bravest possible statement of faith." Emily studied him. This thin, nervous man with his wire spectacles and his bad knee who had stood at that altar and looked away from her, and then looked back when Nathan asked the direct question, who had not been brave but had not been entirely useless either. "Why didn't you stop the ceremony yourself?" she asked. Not with anger, with genuine curiosity. "You saw me, you knew." Birch looked at the table. "I told myself it wasn't my place." "A minister, in a church." "Yes." He said it simply, without excuse. "I was wrong. I knew I was wrong while I was doing it. There is a particular kind of cowardice that comes dressed in reasonableness, and I wore it that day." He looked up. "I am asking if there is something I can do now." Emily looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Emily. "Yes," Emily said. "There is." She told him what she needed. He listened. His hands stayed folded on the table, and his expression stayed careful and controlled, but she could see something working through it. Relief, she thought. The relief of a man who has been waiting for permission to do the right thing, and has finally been given it by someone who has the standing to give it. "I can do that," Birch said. "It may cost you," Nathan said. "Caldwell will not take this well." "Caldwell already has very little respect for me," Birch said dryly. "He hasn't attended services in 4 years. What influence he had over me was entirely financial, and," he straightened slightly, "I have been meaning to approach the diocese about a supplemental fund for some time." Despite everything, Emily almost smiled. "Reverend," she said. "Thank you." With Harmon's contract and Birch's testimony, they had 4 pieces: the Carter Agreement, the Brennan contract, the Harmon forfeiture, and a signed statement from the minister who had presided over the coerced ceremony. It was enough for a territorial court. What it was not, Foles had said before he left, was enough for speed. The territorial court moved slowly. Harker, the county judge, moved quickly, and Caldwell was out of patience. The confirmation came that afternoon from a source Emily had not expected: Agnes Brennan, who was 16 years old and arrived at the ranch on her father's horse, with her hair coming undone from its pins and a piece of paper folded in her coat pocket. "My father sent me," she said, slightly breathless, slightly furious, very determined. "He got this from Sutter this morning. Sutter just left it folded under our door, which means either someone paid him to deliver it, or he's losing his nerve about which side he's on." Nathan took the paper and unfolded it. His face changed. He handed it to Emily without a word. It was a copy of a court filing. Harker's court. A hearing had been scheduled for the following morning, 24 hours from now, on the matter of the Carter farm, the Reed property, and a criminal complaint against Nathan Reed for interference with a legal contract. Criminal, not civil. If Harker ruled against them tomorrow, Nathan could face actual charges, not just loss of the ranch charges. Emily set the paper on the table. The room was very quiet. Agnes Brennan stood in the doorway with her chin up, waiting. Caleb came in from the barn and stopped reading the room immediately. "What happened?" "Caldwell moved the hearing to tomorrow," Emily said. "Caleb processed this. So we go tomorrow." "It's Harker's court, Caleb. Harker owes Caldwell money. He will rule in Caldwell's favor regardless of what we present. So we don't go to Harker." Caleb said it like it was obvious. "We get the territorial court to intervene before Harker can rule." "Foles is in Helena. We can't reach him before tomorrow morning." "Then someone else goes to Helena tonight." Caleb looked at Nathan. "You said Foles rode hard. How fast is your bay mare?" Nathan looked at Caleb for a long moment, then at Emily, then back at Caleb. "Fast," Nathan said. "Then someone needs to ride tonight," Caleb said. "With everything we have. Get to Helena before the sun comes up. Find the territorial court. Get someone to file an emergency injunction or whatever it's called, something that stops Harker from ruling tomorrow." "It's a 90-mile ride," Nathan said. "I know," Caleb said. "He was 13 years old, and he said it like he was 40. I'll go." Emily's stomach dropped. "Caleb, I know the road. Dad took me that direction twice when we went to the feed auction. I know the cutoffs. I'm lighter than either of you, which means the horse goes faster." He looked at his sister with steady dark eyes. "And you need to be here tomorrow. You need to stand up in that court and say what happened to you, even if it's Harker's court, even if it's rigged, because the people of this town will be watching and they need to see it." He paused. "Let me do this." Emily looked at her brother. This boy, this almost man, this person she had been protecting and managing and worrying about since he was 3 years old, and saw in his face the same thing she had felt standing at the altar 3 days ago. Someone telling the truth about who they were at cost in front of witnesses. She looked at Nathan. Nathan picked up the copies of all 4 contracts and Birch's signed statement and Foles's preliminary notes, and he organized them with the efficiency of someone who has already made the decision and is now simply executing it. He put them in an oilskin folder and sealed it and handed it to Caleb. "Ride north to the ridge first, then east. There's a cutoff at the Miller Creek crossing that saves 4 miles. Stay on that cutoff until you hit the Helena Road." His voice was steady and direct, not talking to a child. Talking to someone who was going to do a hard thing and needed real information to do it. "When you get to Helena, go to the courthouse. Not the sheriff, the clerk of the territorial court. His name is Arthur Webb. Tell him Nathan Reed sent you. He knows me." Caleb took the folder. He held it with both hands. "What if Foles is already there?" he asked. "Then you give him those documents and let him handle it. If he isn't there yet, you handle it yourself." Nathan looked at him straight. "You can do this." Caleb nodded once. He looked at his sister. Emily crossed to him and took his face in her hands, the same way she had in the farmyard 3 days ago, and she looked at him for a long moment and did not say, "Be careful," or "Come back safe," or any of the things that would have made him feel like a child being protected. She said, "Go fast." He went. The house was very quiet after that. Agnes Brennan had gone home. Nathan was in the barn checking the other horses. Birch had left an hour ago. Harmon had gone to tell his son what was happening in case they needed another body in the courtroom tomorrow. Emily stood in the kitchen alone with the lamp burning, and the 4 empty coffee cups still on the table, and the clean place where the oilskin folder had been, and she felt the full weight of what tomorrow was. It was not the weight of defeat. She didn't feel defeated. She felt the particular heaviness of a moment that has been building for a very long time, and is now here and cannot be postponed any further. The way a storm feels just before it breaks. Or it breaks not yet, but now, and there is nothing to do but stand in it. She had gone to that church as a frightened 19-year-old girl in a borrowed dress with no plan except the truth, and the truth had barely been enough. Tomorrow she was going back to face the same man and the same power, and a judge he owned in front of a town full of people who had made a habit of looking away. And this time she needed to be something different. Not louder, not angrier, stronger, specifically deliberately stronger. Nathan came in from the barn and found her at the table with her hands around an empty cup. He sat down across from her. He didn't ask if she was all right. She had noticed that about him. He never asked that because they both knew it was often the least useful question available. Instead, he said, "What do you need to do tonight?" She thought about it honestly. "I need to decide what I'm going to say tomorrow. Not argue. Harker won't be argued with. Say. There's a difference." There is. If Caleb gets through, if the territorial court acts before Harker rules. If, Nathan said. We plan for without. Without. She nodded. Without Foles. Without the injunction. Just us, and Harmon and Birch and the Brennans, and whatever Caldwell's lawyer throws at us in a courtroom where the judge is already bought. She paused. "I'm not afraid of that." Nathan studied her. "I know you're not," he said. "I was afraid 3 days ago," she said. "I was terrified. But somewhere between the church and this kitchen table, I seem to have run out of afraid." "That happens," Nathan said. "When you've already done the thing you were most frightened of, the things after feel smaller." "Is that what happened to you?" She looked at him directly. "When did you stop being afraid?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm still afraid," he said. "I was afraid when Greaves rode up this morning. I was afraid when I heard Caleb riding out an hour ago." He said it without embarrassment. But afraid and stopped are different things. I stopped stopping a long time ago. Emily looked at this man across the kitchen table. This quiet, deliberate, complicated man who had walked into a church for no reason he could fully explain and had not stopped walking since. "Nathan," she said, "whatever happens tomorrow." "Don't finish that sentence," he said quietly. She stopped. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "we deal with it then. Tonight you decide what you're going to say, and I'll be there when you say it." A pause. "That's all." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the empty cup and stood and went to the stove to make more coffee, because there was a great deal of night left and a great deal of thinking to do. And Richard Caldwell was sitting somewhere 12 miles away, believing he had already won. He was wrong. Emily Carter was done being afraid. And tomorrow, the whole town of Harlan Creek was going to find that out. Emily did not sleep. She sat at the kitchen table through most of the night with a lamp burning low and a blank piece of paper in front of her, and she thought about every person she needed to reach tomorrow. Not Harker. She had no illusions about Harker. But the people in the room. The people of Harlan Creek, who had spent years watching Richard Caldwell do what he did and telling themselves it wasn't their business, or that they couldn't afford to care, or that someone else would handle it eventually. Those were the people she needed. Not their votes, not their testimony, their presence, their eyes, their willingness to stay in the room and keep watching even when Caldwell's lawyer made it uncomfortable. She wrote nothing on the paper. What she had to say tomorrow could not be written. It had to come from the same place her voice had come from in the church 4 days ago. That place beneath calculation, beneath strategy, beneath fear, where the truth lives in its plainest form. She folded the blank paper and put it in her pocket anyway. It felt like carrying something solid. Nathan came downstairs at 4 in the morning and found her there, and did not comment on the fact that she hadn't slept. He made coffee without being asked and put a cup in front of her and sat down, and they went over the plan one more time, not because either of them had forgotten it, but because saying a thing aloud in the dark hours before you have to do it makes it more real and more possible simultaneously. Harmon would be at the courthouse by 8. The Brennans. Patrick and Helen, both Agnes staying home with the younger children, would arrive separately to avoid the appearance of coordination. Birch would come last, which was important, because Birch's presence would be the most unexpected and therefore the most powerful, and they needed the room to be settled before that particular surprise landed. Nathan would stand with Emily. That was the plan in its entirety. "It's not much," Emily said. "It's enough," Nathan said. "You don't know that." "No," he agreed. "But I know what we have, and I know what we're doing with it, and that's more than Caldwell expects from us, which is the only advantage we have, and I intend to use it." He looked at her across the table. "How are you?" "I told you last night I ran out of afraid." "That was last night." She looked at her coffee cup. "I'm steady," she said. "I'm scared steady, which is different from not scared. But I'm steady." He nodded once. That was sufficient. The road into Harlan Creek felt different that morning. Emily had ridden it dozens of times in her life, to school, to church, to the market, to the feed merchant with her father. It was a road she knew the way, you know the lines of your own hand. But this morning, it felt like a road that had made a decision about itself, the way certain days feel from the first light, like they have already committed to being significant, regardless of what the people in them do. The town was already awake when they arrived. That was the first sign. Harlan Creek, on a Tuesday morning in September, was not an early rising community outside of the farmers, and yet people were on the street, standing in doorways, leaning against fence posts, watching. Word had traveled the way. Word always travels in a small town, not through any formal announcement, but through the specific cellular transmission of a community that has been holding a secret in common and is collectively aware that the secret is about to be addressed publicly, whether they want it to be or not. Emily rode in beside Nathan, and she kept her chin level and her eyes forward, and she felt the weight of every gaze on the street without looking at any of them directly. "Don't stop," Nathan said quietly beside her. "I wasn't going to," she said. Judge Harker's courtroom was the largest interior space in Harlan Creek outside the church, which was fitting in a way that Emily found either ironic or appropriate, depending on how she held it. It was standing room only by the time they arrived, which she had not expected, she had hoped for. Witnesses had planned for witnesses, but the sheer number of people who had chosen to come was something beyond her planning. Harker himself was already behind his bench when they entered. He was a heavy, florid man in his 60s, with the look of someone who ate well and slept well, and had not spent significant energy worrying about other people's problems in some years. He looked at Emily and Nathan's entrance with the particular displeasure of a man whose outcome has already been determined, and who finds the formality of reaching it irritating. Caldwell sat at the plaintiff's table with Prewitt beside him. He was dressed as always with the quiet precision of a man who understands that clothing is a statement of power. He did not look at Emily when she entered. That was intentional, she knew. Denying her the acknowledgement of a glance was its own kind of message. Emily sat at the other table. Nathan sat beside her, not as her lawyer, they had none, but because he was not going to stand elsewhere. Harker called the room to order with the air of a man performing a procedure. This hearing concerns the matter of the Carter Farm property, the civil claim of Richard Caldwell against the estate of the late William Carter, and the criminal complaint against Nathan Reed for unlawful interference with a legal agreement. He shuffled papers. Mr. Prewitt, you may proceed. Prewitt stood. He was a good lawyer. Emily had to give him that. He laid out Caldwell's case cleanly and efficiently. William Carter had borrowed money. The terms had been clear. The forfeiture clause had been properly included. The contract had been witnessed and filed, and Emily Carter's departure from the arranged marriage constituted a breach that triggered the clause and transferred the property immediately to Richard Caldwell. As for Nathan Reed, interference plain and simple, with a legal arrangement between consenting adults. He sat down. Harker looked at Emily. Miss Carter, you are representing yourself. I am, Your Honor. A sound moved through the room. Not quite a murmur, more like a collective intake of breath. You understand that as the respondent you have the right to— I understand my rights, Emily said. I'd like to begin, if that's acceptable. Harker studied her for a moment, with the expression of a man recalibrating his estimate of how long this was going to take. Proceed. Emily stood. She did not look at Caldwell. She looked at the room. My father's name was William Carter, she said. He came to Montana Territory in 1869 with $40 and a plow, and he built a farm from ground that nobody else wanted because it was too far from town and too hard to work in winter. He worked it for 16 years. He buried my mother on it. He raised 2 children on it. He paid his taxes on time and kept his fences sound, and was the kind of neighbor who showed up when you needed him without waiting to be asked. She paused. 3 years ago, he borrowed money from Richard Caldwell to survive a winter that would have killed the farm otherwise. The loan was presented as a neighborly arrangement between 2 men who had known each other for 15 years. The forfeiture clause, the clause that said if the debt could not be repaid in full, the property transferred immediately, was buried on page 3 of a 4-page document in language that my father, who had a 4th-grade education, did not fully understand. Miss Carter, Harker said, the terms of the contract. I'm not finished, Emily said. The room went very quiet. Harker's face darkened. I beg your pardon. I'm not finished, Your Honor. You gave Mr. Prewitt 11 minutes to present his case. I'd like at least 5. She held his gaze with the same steadiness she had held Nathan's across the kitchen table at 4 in the morning. Unless this court is not interested in hearing both sides. Harker looked at the packed room behind Emily. He made a calculation. He settled back. Continue, he said tightly. Emily laid the contracts on the table in front of her. All 4 of them. I have here, she said, the loan agreement between Richard Caldwell and my father. I also have the loan agreement between Richard Caldwell and Patrick Brennan of this county, signed 2 years ago, and the agreement between Caldwell and George Harmon, signed 3 years ago. She looked up. All 3 contracts contain identical forfeiture language, word for word. Not similar, identical. The same clause copied precisely across 3 separate agreements with 3 separate families. Prewitt was on his feet. Your Honor, those documents. Are originals, Emily said. Held by the families who signed them. You can examine them. Your Honor, the introduction of unrelated contracts. They are not unrelated, Emily said. They are the pattern. Harker's gavel came down. Mr. Pruitt, sit down. Miss Carter. He paused, and Emily could see him making another calculation more complex this time, with the room full of witnesses he had not expected. You may continue. Emily continued. She walked through each contract. She explained the forfeiture clause in plain language that every person in the room could understand, because she had spent the night not writing a speech, but finding the words that were already there, the words that needed no legal training to comprehend. She showed how each family had been approached during a period of financial vulnerability. She showed how the loan terms made default nearly inevitable. She showed how the forfeiture clause had been in each case the point, not to get paid back, to get the land. The room was absolutely still. Then George Harmon stood up from the gallery. Harker looked at him. Sir, this is not an open. My name is George Harmon, Harmon said with the slow, irrefutable weight of a 68-year-old man who has decided he is done being quiet. I signed one of those contracts, the one on the right. I lost my land because of it. My wife is buried on that land, and I have to trespass to visit her grave. Harker's gavel. Sir Patrick Brennan stood. Patrick Brennan, the middle contract is mine. Helen Brennan beside him stood without speaking. She simply stood. Harker's gavel came down 3 times in rapid succession. This court is not a public forum. If you do not, Reverend Aldous Birch. Every head in the room turned. Birch had come in through the side door, which nobody had noticed, and he was standing with his hat in both hands, and his bad knee visibly troubling him, and an expression of a man who has made his peace with the consequences of what he is about to do. I presided over the ceremony 4 days ago, at which Miss Carter was brought to be married to Mr. Caldwell, Birch said. His voice was thin, but it carried with the precision of a man trained to project to the back of a room. I have a signed statement prepared for the territorial court, should it be relevant, testifying to the conditions under which that ceremony was conducted, and to Miss Carter's explicit statement of non-consent, made before witnesses prior to the intervention of Mr. Reed. The room erupted. Not loudly, not the way crowds erupt in stories with shouting and chaos. It erupted the way a room erupts when something that has been held under pressure for a long time is suddenly released, a collective exhale, a turning of bodies, a wave of whispered conversation that rolled from the front of the room to the back in under 3 seconds. Harker's gavel was working hard. Caldwell had not moved. He sat at his table with his hands folded and his face controlled and his eyes on the middle distance, and he was doing what he always did. Waiting, calculating, finding the angle that served him. Emily looked at him directly for the first time that morning. He felt it. He turned and met her gaze. She did not look away. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the courtroom. The man who had believed she was a debt to be collected, and the woman who had decided she was not. And Emily held his eyes with the steadiness of someone who is no longer frightened of the thing in front of her. Caldwell looked away first. Emily felt it land in her chest, like a stone dropping into still water. Quiet, definite, permanent. What happened next arrived from a direction that nobody in that courtroom, including Emily, had been certain would come. The door at the back of the room opened. It was not Caleb. It was a man Emily had never seen, well-dressed, carrying a leather satchel, moving with the brisk efficiency of someone who has ridden a long way and has a specific thing to do at the end of it. He walked to the front of the room without stopping and handed Judge Harker a document. Harker read it. The room watched Harker read it. Whatever was happening in Harker's face was not comfortable. His florid complexion went through several stages. Surprise, then something that looked briefly like anger. Then, the particular blankness of a man reassessing his situation rapidly. This court, Harker said, and his voice had lost a significant portion of its authority, has received notification from the Honorable James Weston, Justice of the Montana Territorial Court, that the matters before this court have been placed under territorial review, pending examination of evidence submitted by one. He cleared his throat. Martin Foles, land surveyor, and one Caleb Carter, minor, of Crawford County. The silence was total. Emily closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Caleb had made it. The territorial court has issued a temporary injunction. Harker continued reading with the flat effect of a man reading his own sentence. Staying any ruling by this court on the matter of the Carter farm, the Reed property, or any related civil or criminal complaints, pending a full territorial hearing to be scheduled within 30 days. He set the document down. He did not look at Caldwell. This hearing is therefore adjourned. The room broke open. Not chaos, but sound. Real human sound. The kind that happens when a thing that needed to happen finally does. When people who have been holding themselves in careful stillness for too long are suddenly released from the obligation. Emily heard her own name. Heard Nathan's heard. Harmon's voice, somewhere behind her, deep and rough, with something that might have been relief, or might have been something older and more complicated than relief. Nathan's hand closed briefly around her forearm, not pulling her, not directing her. Just there. A point of contact in the noise. She turned to look at him. He looked like himself, quiet, controlled, the same way he always looked, except that his eyes were doing something they did not always do. Something that opened rather than closed. And she understood that he was feeling this the same way she was under the surface, where it didn't show easily. He made it, she said. He made it, Nathan confirmed. Caldwell left the courthouse without speaking to anyone. That was how Emily knew it wasn't over. A man like Caldwell did not make scenes when things went wrong. He left quietly and thought carefully and came back better prepared. And the fact that he walked out of that room with his chin level and his silver watch chain catching the light, and his lawyer half a step behind him, was not the posture of a man who had been defeated. It was the posture of a man who was recalculating. She said as much to Nathan as the crowd thinned around them. "I know," he said. "The territorial hearing is 30 days. He has 30 days to—" "I know." He turned to face her fully. "But he doesn't have what he had this morning. This morning, he had a cooperative local judge and a room full of people who were planning to look the other way. He has neither of those things now." He paused. "You did that. In there. You did that." Harmon stood up, Emily said. "The Brennans stood up. Birch came through that door and—" "Because you made it possible for them to," Nathan said. "Because you stood up first. In the church 4 days ago in front of everyone, when you had no plan and no backup and no reason to think anyone would follow." His voice was even, but it was not neutral. It had the specific quality of a man saying something. He has been thinking for a while and has decided to say now plainly without decoration. "You made it possible. Everything else followed from that." Emily looked at him. She had things she could say. She thought about saying several of them. What came out was, "Caleb is still in Helena." Nathan almost smiled. The almost was becoming more frequent, she had noticed, and was gradually moving in the direction of actual. "I'll ride for him this afternoon." "I'll come with you." "Emily." "Nathan." She used the same tone she had used in the barn the night she rode to the Brennans. Not defiant, simply definite. "I'll come with you." He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. They were halfway to the door when Helen Brennan caught Emily's arm. Helen Brennan was a quiet. She had been quiet throughout, even when her husband spoke, even when she stood. But she was looking at Emily now, with an expression that Emily would remember for a very long time, because it was the expression of a woman giving something back to herself. "I want you to know," Helen said, "that I have thought about that contract every day for 2 years. Every day I woke up and thought I should have spoken. I should have pushed Patrick to do something. I should have—" Her voice caught briefly and then steadied. "And I didn't. Because I was afraid of what it would cost us, and I didn't think one family alone could do anything." She held Emily's gaze. "You weren't one family alone. You were one girl. One girl who said no in a church when everyone was looking at the floor." She squeezed Emily's arm once. "Thank you." Emily could not speak for a moment. She covered Helen's hand with her own. "Thank you for the contract," she said finally. "Thank you for the door in the middle of the night." Helen Brennan nodded. She did not need more than that. They found Caleb 12 miles down the Helena Road. How was riding back heading home. The oilskin folder gone, a territorial court receipt tucked in his coat pocket, and an expression on his face that was working very hard to look like a normal 13-year-old returning from an errand and not entirely succeeding, because underneath the studied casualness, he was pale with exhaustion and lit up from the inside with the specific brightness of someone who has done something genuinely hard and found out they could. Emily reached him first. She pulled Clover up beside him and said nothing for a moment, just looked at her brother. "It worked?" he asked. His voice came out slightly less steady than he intended. "It worked," she said. Harker adjourned. 30-day territorial review. Caleb exhaled. It was not a dramatic exhale. It was a quiet one, long, slow, the kind that empties the body of something it has been holding under tension for a sustained period. His shoulders dropped. His hands loosened on the reins. Something in his face that had been held very tight since their father died. Maybe longer. Maybe since the first winter. The farm started struggling, moved towards something less rigid. "Foles was there," Caleb said. "He got there about an hour before me. He'd already filed. But the court clerk Webb, he said having me show up with the originals meant they could act faster." "You were the difference," Nathan said from just behind Emily. Caleb looked at Nathan. He was 13 and bone-tired, and he had just ridden 90 miles in the dark, and he absorbed Nathan's assessment with the dignity of someone receiving accurate information. "What happens in 30 days?" Caleb asked. "Territorial court," Nathan said. "Full hearing, proper judge, Caldwell's contracts under proper legal scrutiny." "And the farm?" Nathan looked at Emily. Emily looked at her brother. "The farm is ours," she said. "We're going to prove it in 30 days. But it's ours, Caleb. It was always ours." He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was doing the thing their father's jaw, their father's expression. "Okay," he said. "Good." He turned his horse toward home. Riding back, the three of them together on the September road, with the afternoon going gold around them. Emily turned something over in her mind that had been sitting there since the courtroom. Caldwell had left without a word, without a threat, without a scene, without the kind of public fury that would have made him look weak. He had simply gone, and the very composure of his departure was what made it dangerous. She had said so to Nathan in the courthouse, and he had agreed, and now she said it again, because the thought would not settle. "He's going to come after you," she said. Nathan rode without changing pace. "Most likely. Not the farm, not me, you. The criminal complaint was against you specifically, and even with the injunction." "The injunction stays the local action," Nathan said. "It doesn't erase the complaint. He'll find another angle." "What angle?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "The ranch. The deed." She turned to look at him. "There was a boundary dispute about 8 years ago," he said. "North fence line. I had it surveyed and the survey supported my position and the other party accepted it. It was settled." He paused. "But Caldwell knows about it. He has access to county records. A settled dispute that gets refiled with the right framing could tie up my title long enough to matter." "Can he do that?" "He can file anything he wants," Nathan said. "Filing isn't winning, but it takes time and money to fight, and time and money are his weapon." He looked straight ahead. "We knew this wasn't over with the injunction." "Then we need more than 3 contracts and a minister," Emily said. "Yes." "How many families has he done this to?" "Foles thinks 5 or 6, maybe more." "5 or 6 families," Emily said. 5 or 6 original contracts. That's not a civil dispute anymore, Nathan. That's a criminal fraud case. That's a federal matter." Nathan looked at her. "There's a federal land office in Helena," Emily said. "If Caldwell's contracts involve federal land grants, and in this territory, most farms do, then what he's been doing isn't just a local court matter. It's federal fraud." The silence on the road had a different quality suddenly. Caleb, riding just ahead of them, had turned around without them noticing. He was looking at his sister with an expression that was equal parts admiration and something that was going to become in the years ahead. His default response to Emily Carter, having an idea, complete and total belief that it would work. Nathan held Emily's gaze for a long moment. "Foles knows the federal land office," he said. I know he does, Emily said. That's why I want you to write to him tonight. The road ran ahead of them toward the ranch, toward the lamp that would be burning in the window when they arrived toward the kitchen table, where 3 people, and whatever allies they could gather, were going to spend 30 days building something that Richard Caldwell, with all his patience and all his silver watch chains and all his carefully cultivated power, had never once thought to prepare for. The truth assembled completely in front of people with the authority to act on it. He had always bet on people being too afraid to go that far. He had never bet against Emily Carter. That was his only real mistake, and it was going to cost him everything. The letter to Martin Foles went out that same night. Nathan wrote it at the kitchen table, while Emily sat across from him, going through everything they had, the 4 contracts, Birch's statement, the territorial court receipt. Caleb had brought back folded inside his coat, organizing it the way her father had organized seed inventory before planting season by category and priority, because order was the only thing that made a large and complicated problem feel manageable. Caleb was asleep before the lamp had been burning an hour. He had eaten everything on his plate, and then everything left on the serving dish, and then put his head down on his folded arms at the table, and been unconscious in under 2 minutes, the way only the very young and the very exhausted can manage. Nathan had moved him to his cot without waking him with the matter-of-fact gentleness of someone who had decided without announcing it that Caleb Carter was under his protection, and that protection included not letting a 13-year-old sleep upright in a kitchen chair after riding 90 miles in a night. Emily had watched that and said nothing, but she had noticed it. She noticed everything Nathan did that he did not draw attention to because there was a great deal of it. The letter went into specific detail about the federal land grant angle, which parcels in Crawford County were original federal grants, which families had lost them, what the legal threshold was for federal fraud versus civil contract dispute. Nathan wrote clearly and without embellishment, and Emily read each paragraph as he finished it and twice suggested sharper language, which he accepted without argument. They worked well together that way. She was finding that more and more the absence of friction between them on the things that mattered, the way their thinking ran in parallel without competing. When the letter was sealed and addressed, Nathan set it by the door for the morning rider and looked at the table at the organized stacks of documents at Emily's handwriting on the page of notes she'd made. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." "I'll sleep when I'm done thinking." "Then we're in the same position," she said. He looked at her. That look he had steady, unhurried, the look of a man who sees what is in front of him without editing it into something more comfortable. 30 days is not a long time, he said. 30 days is enough, Emily said. We have the pattern. We have the originals. We have testimony. If Foles can get the federal land office engaged. Caldwell's contracts don't just fail, they constitute fraud on federal property, which is a different category of consequence entirely. And if the federal office moves slowly, then we make noise until they move faster. She said it without drama. That is what I intend to do with the next 30 days, Nathan. Make enough noise in enough of the right places that this cannot be quietly buried. He was quiet for a moment. You know what you've become, he said. She raised an eyebrow. 4 days ago, you were a girl in a borrowed dress who dropped her flowers in a church, he said. Right now, you are the most organized threat Richard Caldwell has ever faced, and he doesn't fully understand that yet. Emily looked at him across the table. Good, she said. Let's keep it that way until it's too late for him to adjust. The next 30 days were the hardest and the fullest of Emily Carter's life. Foles responded to Nathan's letter within 5 days, faster than either of them had expected, with confirmation that the federal land office in Helena had an investigator already aware of irregularities in Crawford County land transfers and had been waiting for 2 years for someone to come forward with documented evidence. The Brennan contract, the Harmon contract, the Carter agreement, and the 2 additional cases Foles had uncovered in his own research were exactly what that investigator needed to open a formal inquiry. When Emily read Foles's letter aloud at the kitchen table, Caleb said nothing for a moment and then said with the careful precision of a boy who wants to be accurate, "So it was always there. Someone was always watching. They just needed us to move first." "Yes," Nathan said. Caleb absorbed this. "That makes me angry," he said. That we had to be the ones to move first. Yes, Nathan said again. That's the right response to that. It was one of the things Emily observed about Nathan Reed during those 30 days, the way he talked to Caleb. Not down to him, not past him, not in the careful, simplified language adults use for children when they want to be understood without being challenged. He talked to Caleb the way he talked to anyone whose intelligence he respected, which was simply directly, and Caleb responded by being almost visibly more himself. Taller somehow. More settled in his own judgment. Emily noticed this the way she noticed everything Nathan did quietly. She did not say anything about it yet. There were 30 days of work to get through first. The federal investigator arrived in Harlan Creek on the 11th day. His name was Edward Marsh, and he was not what Emily had expected. Not the imposing federal presence she had imagined, but a compact, methodical man in his 40s, with a traveling case full of files, and the particular brand of patience that belongs to people who have been doing careful, unglamorous work for a long time, and have made their peace with the fact that it rarely looks exciting from the outside. He came to Nathan's ranch, not to the town office, because Foles had advised him that the town office still reported to Harker, and Harker still had his courthouse. He sat at the same kitchen table that had become the center of everything, and went through every document Emily had assembled, and asked precise questions in a quiet voice, and wrote down the answers in a small notebook. At the end of 2 hours, he closed the notebook and said, "Miss Carter, what you have assembled here is sufficient to open a federal fraud investigation into Richard Caldwell's land acquisition practices." The kitchen was very still. "The contracts involve federal grant land in 4 of the 5 cases," Marsh continued. "That means this is not a civil matter in a county court. That means this is federal jurisdiction, and Judge Harker has no standing to rule on any aspect of it." He looked at Nathan. "The criminal complaint against you is effectively void. You cannot be prosecuted locally for interference with a federal fraud scheme." Nathan said nothing. Emily could see what he was doing with this information, absorbing it quietly, not celebrating because the outcome hadn't landed yet, only the path to it. "What happens to Caldwell?" Caleb asked from the counter. Marsh looked at the boy. "If the investigation confirms what these contracts indicate, Mr. Caldwell will face federal charges for fraudulent acquisition of federally granted land. The contracts will be voided. The properties will be reviewed for return to original owners where possible." He paused. "It will take time. Federal processes are not fast." "But it happens," Emily said. Marsh looked at her. "Yes, Miss Carter, it happens." She put both hands flat on the table. Outside, she could hear the wind in the grass and the sound of Nathan's horses in the barn and the ordinary sounds of a working ranch in mid-September. And she thought about her father's hands on a plow and her mother's kitchen garden in the summer, and the deed she had taken from the farmhouse the night they left, and the 11-year-old girl she had been when she first understood that the world was not arranged in anyone's favor by default, and that you had to arrange things yourself carefully with whatever you had. She had had a blank piece of paper and the truth. It had been enough. The second major shift came on the 19th day, and it came from inside Caldwell's own operation. Sutter, the man who had followed Emily from the Brennan farm that first night, the man whose silhouette she had watched from the tree line until he turned away, came to Nathan's ranch on a Tuesday morning and knocked on the door with his hat in his hands. Emily opened it. He looked like a man who had been sleeping badly for 2 weeks. "I need to talk to Reed," he said. "You can talk to me," Emily said. He looked at her. She held the door. "All right," he said. "You." She let him in, but did not invite him to sit, because she did not yet know what he was, and she stood across the kitchen with her arms at her sides and waited. "Caldwell knows about the federal investigator," Sutter said. "Marsh was seen in town on the day he arrived. Caldwell's had 2 private conversations with Prewitt since then that I wasn't in the room for, but I know the look after those conversations." He turned his hat around in his hands. "He's moving money, transferring it out of the county. Prewitt has been sending documents to a bank address in Billings. I saw the envelopes in the outgoing mail." Emily processed this. "He's preparing to run. Or preparing to make the money difficult to find when the federal case opens." Sutter looked at the table. "I've worked for that man for 6 years. I didn't ask what the contracts meant. I didn't ask why he wanted to know who was struggling and who had borrowed from the bank and who had a bad season. His voice was flat, not self-pitying. I just did what I was told. And now, Emily said, now I'm telling you what I know. He met her eyes. Because I live in this county. Because my sister's husband borrowed from Caldwell 2 years ago, and I saw what it did to their farm, and I told myself it was a private business matter, and I was wrong. A beat of silence. What do you need? Emily looked at him carefully. He was not a good man who had made a mistake. He was a man who had made a sustained choice over 6 years and had arrived at a point where the cost of continuing was higher than the cost of changing direction. That was different. But she was not in a position to turn away useful information on the grounds of the source's imperfect history. Write down everything you know about the money transfers, she said. Dates, amounts if you have them, the billing's bank address. Anything you saw on those envelopes. She held his gaze. And if Caldwell makes any move toward leaving the county, I need to know within the hour. Sutter nodded. I'm not promising you anything, Emily said. I don't have the authority to promise you anything. What you do here, you do, because it's the right thing to do. That's the only currency I have. He looked at her for a long moment. Fair enough, he said. She told Nathan about Sutter that evening. He listened the way he listened to everything, without interrupting, without letting his expression do the work his voice could do later. When she finished, he said, Do you trust him? No, Emily said. But I trust the information. There's a difference. Yes. He's not doing this for us. He's doing it for himself, which means he'll keep doing it as long as it serves him. She looked at Nathan. That's enough for now. Nathan looked at the window for a moment. Caldwell moving money is significant. If he liquidates before the federal case opens, recovering assets for the families becomes much harder. I know. I've already written to Marsh. He looked back at her. When? An hour ago. Caleb took it to the postwriter. Nathan studied her. That look again, the open one, the one that didn't close. You're 3 steps ahead, he said. I've been trying to be. She held his gaze. Someone has to be. Howe was quiet for a moment. Then, with the kind of simplicity that was, she had learned his version of emphasis. Clara would have liked you. Emily stilled. He had not mentioned Clara since the night before she rode to the Brennans. He said it now without apparent difficulty, which told her something about how far he had traveled inside himself in the last 19 days on a road she could not see, but could infer from small signs the way you infer weather from the behavior of animals. Tell me about her, Emily said quietly. He thought about it for a moment, not hesitating, choosing. She was practical, he said. Like you, but different. She was practical about people. She could read what someone needed before they knew themselves. She would have seen what Harmon needed in that room before any of the rest of us. He paused. She would have gone to Sutter herself and asked him directly before he had a chance to come to us. She sounds extraordinary. She was. He said it without grief now, with the quality of something that has been through grief and come out the other side of it into something steadier. I stopped letting people close after her because I thought I was protecting myself. I understand now that I was just stopping. He looked at Emily directly. I don't want to keep stopping. The kitchen was very quiet. Emily said, Nathan, I'm not asking you anything, he said quickly, not pulling back, clarifying. Not now. Not with everything still unfinished. He stopped. Tried again. I wanted you to know that what has happened in the last 3 weeks is not something I'm going to let myself look away from when this is over. Whatever it is, whatever it becomes. A pause. That's all. Emily looked at this man. This deliberate, quiet, complicated man who had walked into a church on instinct and had not stopped walking since, who had sent Foles to Helena before anyone asked him to, who moved Caleb to his cot without waking him, who learned the law because life had taught him that the law mattered, and then used that knowledge not for himself, but for whoever needed it. I know, she said. I'm not looking away either. That was all they said. It was the most they had ever said. The federal hearing was set for October 14th. Caldwell did not run. That surprised people, but it did not surprise Emily, because she had spent enough time thinking about Richard Caldwell to understand him in the way you understand a thing that has been threatening you completely without flinching. I was not a man who ran. Running was an admission of guilt that he was incapable of making to himself. He would stand in the territorial courthouse in Helena and present his version of events with perfect composure and a very good lawyer, and he would lose, and even then he would find a way to frame the loss as a thing that had been done to him rather than a consequence of what he had done. But he would lose. Emily knew it the way she had known standing at that altar that she could not go through with the wedding, with the whole body, not just the mind. She and Nathan rode to Helena together with Caleb and Harmon and the Brennans and Birch and Martin Foles, met them at the courthouse steps with a briefcase that contained enough documented evidence to support everything Emily had assembled across 30 days of coffee and lamplight and kitchen table conversations. The hearing lasted 2 days. The territorial judge was a tall, sharp-boned woman named Justice Miriam Cole, the first female justice appointed to the Montana Territory, a fact that Emily had not known until she saw her take her seat at the bench, and the sight of it went through her like a current, like something that had been waiting to connect, completing a circuit. Justice Cole read every contract. She questioned every witness. She asked Emily directly, not through Foles, not through Nathan, but directly to walk through the sequence of events from her father's borrowing to the morning of the interrupted wedding. Emily spoke for 40 minutes. She did not use the blank paper in her pocket. She did not need it. She spoke about her father's hands, about the fourth-grade education that made the third page of a 4-page contract essentially inaccessible, about the morning Caldwell came to the farmhouse door 3 days after the funeral, about the borrowed dress and the dropped wildflowers and the specific quality of a room full of people choosing not to see. She spoke about Nathan walking through the church doors. She spoke about Caleb riding 90 miles in the dark. She spoke about Helen Brennan opening her door in the middle of the night. George Harmon visiting his wife's grave on land he could no longer call his own. Reverend Birch walking through the side door of a courtroom on a bad knee because he had decided finally to do what he should have done at an altar. She spoke about what it meant to be told at 19 years old that you had no choice. And she spoke about choosing anyway. Justice Cole listened without expression. That was not coldness. Emily could see it was attention, real attention, the kind that saves its response for the end. When Emily finished, the courtroom was quiet, in the way it had been quiet in the church 4 days ago, but a different kind of quiet. Not the quiet of people looking away, the quiet of people who are fully present. Justice Cole made her ruling on the morning of the second day. Richard Caldwell's contracts were declared fraudulent instruments under federal land statutes. The forfeiture clauses were voided. The Carter farm, the Brennan property, and the Harmon land were to be restored to their original owners. Caldwell's assets in Crawford County were frozen pending a criminal fraud investigation to be conducted by federal authorities. Judge Harker was formally reported to the territorial bar for conflict of interest, and Richard Caldwell, who sat through the entire 2 days with his hands folded and his expression controlled, and his silver watch chain catching the light, was taken out of the courthouse by 2 federal marshals in full view of everyone who had come from Harlan Creek to watch. He did not look at Emily as they passed her. She did not need him to. Outside the courthouse. Harmon shook Nathan's hand and then could not seem to let go, and Nathan let him hold on as long as he needed to. Helen Brennan held Emily for a long time without speaking, and Patrick Brennan stood beside his wife with his hand on her shoulder and his eyes very bright. Birch sat on the courthouse steps and looked at the sky with the expression of a man who has just kept a very long overdue appointment with his own conscience. Caleb stood beside Emily and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "Can we go home now?" Emily looked at her brother. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." They went back to the farm first. It was Caleb's idea, and it was the right one. They rode the 2 miles north from town and came up the familiar road and the familiar gate still propped against the post, still waiting for someone to rehang it, and Emily got down from Clover and walked across the yard and stood in front of the farmhouse door. It was exactly as they had left it 5 weeks ago. The overgrown kitchen garden. The fence posts that needed mending. The small marks of her father's 40 years on this land. The accumulated evidence of a life lived facing the same direction, not glamorously, not easily, but faithfully. She put her hand on the doorframe. Nathan came to stand beside her. He did not say anything for a moment. He understood that there are things that need to be felt before they can be spoken, and he was a man who respected that interval. After a while he said, "You held this the whole time." "I tried to," she said. "Not tried." He turned to look at her. "You did. Emily, you held all of it. The contracts, the witnesses, the timing your brother, the federal angle. You held all of it while it was trying to fall apart." "You held half of it," she said. "The half I could reach," he said. "You held the rest." She turned to look at him. He was closer than he usually stood, she noticed, and she thought it was probably the first time in 5 weeks that the constant pressure of the next thing had lifted enough for either of them to notice where they were actually standing in relation to each other. "Nathan," she said. "Yes. You said in the kitchen 3 weeks ago that you didn't want to keep stopping." "I remember. I've been thinking about that." She looked at him steadily. "I need you to know something. What I feel for you is not gratitude. I know the difference. I was grateful to you the night you walked into that church. What I feel now is not the same thing." He was very still. "What I feel now," she said, "is that you are the person I want beside me. Not because I need protection. I've proven I don't need protection, and so have you. But because when I think about the next thing, and the thing after that, and all the things that come after that, you are in every one of them." She paused. "That's not gratitude. That's something else." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "It is." He reached up and took her hand from the doorframe. He held it the way he did everything quietly, without drama, with the specific gentleness of someone who knows what things cost and is careful with them. He did not say anything else. He didn't need to. Behind them. Caleb made a strangled noise that was somewhere between embarrassment and relief, which broke the moment into something human and laughing. And Emily turned and threw a look at her brother that made him raise his hands in surrender and find somewhere else to be very quickly. Nathan was smiling. Not almost. Actually. She had been waiting for that smile for 5 weeks, and it was she decided exactly what she had expected it to be. They were married in November. Not in the First Community Church of Harlan Creek, because Emily Carter had opinions about that particular venue, and Nathan Reed had no intention of overriding them. They were married in the yard of the Carter farm on a cold, clear Saturday, with the mountains clean and white at the horizon, and the people who came were the people who had earned the right to be there. The Brennans, the Harmons, Agnes and her parents, Martin Foles, who rode from Helena for it, Reverend Birch, who had been offered the option of refusing and chose not to. Caleb stood beside his sister. Nathan stood across from her. When Birch asked if she took the... Emily did not hesitate, did not perform, did not do anything except look at Nathan Reed and say, "Yes," the way you say things when you mean them completely. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the full weight of a person who has chosen something with open eyes and knows exactly what the choosing cost, and finds the price entirely worth paying. Nathan said yes, the same way. Birch said quietly, with something in his voice that had not been there 4 days ago in a different ceremony, "It is done." In the months that followed, the Carter farm came back. Not all at once, the way things come back in real life. Not in stories, which is gradually with setbacks, with seasons that are harder than expected, and seasons that surprise you by being easier. The kitchen garden came back first because Emily planted it in the spring with a fury that was only partly about vegetables. The fence posts came back. The gate her father had never rehung finally got rehung by Caleb on a Saturday in March, and it swung straight and true, and Emily stood in the yard and watched it, and felt her father's presence in the way you feel a person's presence through the things they cared about. Nathan's ranch and the Carter farm were not merged. They were neighboring operations 2 miles apart, managed with the efficiency of two people who had proven they could coordinate without friction. He was there most mornings. She was there most evenings. It was an arrangement that made practical sense and also made every other kind of sense, and neither of them felt the need to explain it to anyone who raised an eyebrow. Caleb turned 14 in December and announced that he intended to study law. Nobody who had seen him at the kitchen table, or in the territorial courthouse, or on the Helena Road, with an oilskin folder pressed to his chest, was even slightly surprised. Emily started a reading class at the Brennan House for women in the Valley who had never had access to schooling. Not a formal school. Not yet. But a Tuesday afternoon gathering with books borrowed from the Territorial Library in Helena and tea that Helen Brennan provided without being asked, and discussion that ranged by the end of the first month far beyond reading into the questions that mattered to the women in that room. Who owned what? What they had signed. What they were allowed to refuse. What the law said versus what the law was told. It was not a revolution. It was a Tuesday afternoon. But revolutions, Emily had learned, are made of accumulated Tuesday afternoons of ordinary people in ordinary rooms, deciding that the truth is worth saying out loud, regardless of who is looking away. She had learned that standing at an altar in a borrowed dress with wildflowers falling from her hands. She had spent every day since making it count. On a cold February evening, Nathan sat across from her at the kitchen table, her father's table, the table that had held the contracts and the lamp and the long nights of planning, and watched her make notes for the next week's reading class. And he said out of the quiet that they both inhabited comfortably now, "Your father would be proud of you." Emily did not look up immediately. She finished the sentence she was writing. Then she set down the pen and looked at the man across the table from her. This man who had walked into a church on a summer morning with no plan and no obligation, and nothing but the knowledge that a person was not a debt to be paid. "I know," she said. She picked up the pen again. The lamp burned steady between them. Outside, the Montana winter pressed its full weight against the walls of the house, and the house held. It had been built to hold. It would hold for a long time yet. And inside it, at a table that had survived everything thrown at it, two people who had chosen each other freely and with full knowledge of the cost sat together in the light. Not at the end of something, but at the beginning of everything that came after the fight was won. That was enough. That was more than enough.